Good evening. It is 7 o'clock on the 18th of December, and we'll start the meeting today.
Mr. Hasse,
Yes, here.
Mr. Seaman,
Yes.
Mr. Coiner, Mr. Tarapani,
Here.
Mr. Frayne,
Here.
Mr. Stavropoulos, Mr. Vesey, Ms. McCumber.
Here.
Roll call has been called. Forgive me, folks. I'm new at this, so just bear with me here, please. Our first application. Oh, thank you.
Move to approve minutes.
Move to approve minutes. Yes. thank
Second.
you. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Approval of minutes have been done. Second is the quasi-judicial announcement and swearing in of speakers.
This is a quasi-judicial proceeding where the Planning and Zoning Board acts in a quasi-judicial rather than a legislative capacity. At a quasi-judicial hearing, it is not the board's function to make law, but rather to apply law that has already been established. In a quasi-judicial hearing, the board is required by law to make findings of fact based upon the evidence presented at the hearing and apply those findings of fact to previously established criteria contained in the Code of Ordinances in order to make a legal decision regarding the application before it. The board may only consider evidence at this hearing that the law considers competent, substantial, and relevant to the issues. If the competent, substantial, and relevant evidence at the hearing demonstrates that the applicant has met the criteria established in the Code of Ordinances, then the board is required by law to find in favor of the applicant. By the same token, if the competent, substantial, and relevant evidence at the hearing demonstrates that the applicant has failed to meet the criteria established in the Code of Ordinances, then the board is required by law to find against the applicant. Any members of the board wishing to disclose any ex parte communication or conflicts of interest tonight? If anyone is going to give any testimony tonight, any witnesses, an applicant, or anyone on their behalf, they could please stand to be sworn in. Raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give tonight is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So sworn.
Thank you. So number 4 is the application of 17-66, site plan approval to construct a 55,216 square foot area, including 2 marine mammal rehabilitation pools, pool shade structure, and a mobile office laboratory for the Clearwater Marine Aquarium within Fred Howard Park.
Hi, I'm Michelle Wagner with Planning and Zoning. I'm new too, so bear with me also. This application is 1766 for Clearwater Marine Aquarium, a nonprofit marine life rehabilitation organization. They are applying to approve a site plan of the 55,216 square foot area with 2 marine mammal rehabilitation pools, the pool shade structures, and a mobile office laboratory for the Clearwater Marine Aquarium for a stranding station. So the facility will only be used intermittently for the purpose of rehabilitating marine life when it comes to that particular location. The facility will not be open to the public. It will be fully enclosed within the park in the northwest portion of the park. It'll be fenced. It's not designed to be an educational facility, nor is it designed to be open to the public at any time. The property size that they have agreed, they've entered into an agreement with Pinellas County for the use of 1.27 acres in the northwestern portion of Fred Howard Park. The land use there is recreation and open space, and the zoning is land conservation. It's surrounded entirely by parkland. On November 29th, 2017, the Board of Adjustment granted the applicant a variance to provide relief from parking lot landscaping and screening requirements because of its isolated location. The environmental analysis conducted on the site identified 2 potentially active gopher tortoise burrows, so an on-site relocation permit will be applied for. The Technical Review Committee has reviewed most recently on November 13th, 2017, and determined the application for site plan approval to be complete and in compliance with the standards for review. The site plan is consistent with the future land use plan and the corresponding policies of the comprehensive plan. The proposed project meets the concurrency management standards of Section 122 of the Land Development Code. Staff finds the application for site plan approval consistent with the applicable review criteria, and therefore the staff recommendation is to approve the site plan subject to the following. The developer is responsible for acquiring all other jurisdictional permits and/or approvals and for meeting the minimum criteria of the Land Development Code. Any lighting to be installed on site is to be shielded and directed internal to the site. Construction plans shall be consistent with the approved site plan. The payment of all requisite fees attendant to the project shall be paid in accordance with the Land Development Code. And this site plan shall expire in accordance with the approved alternate phasing schedule as depicted on sheet C2.2 within 3 years of the effective date unless an application has been filed for a building permit with construction plans signed and sealed by a registered engineer licensed in the state of Florida. I'd be happy to answer any questions at this time.
I have a few.
Okay.
Why now? Why are they asking for this now, and where do the animals go for rehab currently?
So I think that question will probably be better answered by the applicant. They're here tonight, so they'll be able to speak about why now and a little bit more about how the animals will be cared for at the site.
Excuse me, I've had a cold. Other question I have is there any monetary value for us, the city, by having it there?
There's not a monetary value. They're a nonprofit organization, so our value is really the consistency with our comprehensive plan, which is really about conservation and protection.
So there's no rent or anything like that?
No, that's a Pinellas County park, so.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Anyone else?
Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Michelle, thanks for your presentation and your staff report. Some of my questions were answered within that in terms of the recreational opportunities. And then I see in the staff report that there's no issue with traffic concurrency. I was glad to see that the parking is being done with impervious surface as far as the crushed shell or I guess rocks, which is nice. Does the applicant have to adhere? I didn't see anything in the backup in regard to the public art ordinance. Is there any?
No, this project is under the threshold of $1 million. So.
Okay. And then I saw where there was something that had been resolved related to drainage by Brian Anderson. I was wondering if you could elaborate on that a little bit as far as what were his comments, or what were the concerns that staff had and wanted to resolve with him?
If it's all right with you, I would rather have Charlie speak on that. He's the engineer from Ayers who's going to be discussing more about their site plan.
Okay. And then was there any, did anybody check in terms of deed restrictions to see if this kind of activity or development could even be done on the property?
Deed restrictions as far as the,
Well, like if when the property was transferred back in the day, I don't know, from whoever owned it, is there, a restriction on the property that would prohibit this type of development?
There is not a restriction on the property. It's not our jurisdiction for, at least we don't own it or have any means to it. That was all included. The research that was done for that was included in the lease agreement that is actually back up to your staff report that actually allows them, Clearwater Marine Aquarium, to come before you to even represent the property because they currently don't own it. All that's being done here is a lease, and there is no limitations on the property for this type of use. It's consistent with it's consistent with a recreational use, even though it's not open to the public. It is a consistent use for recreation for the animals and things that are being protected.
You understand
out
where
there.
I'm going, right? Like
Yes.
If there was, if there's a conservation easement on the property, right? Which
There's not. Well, it's in a land conservation zoning, but there's no specific conservation easement. Basically, that park is dedicated to the people of Pinellas County and managed by the Parks Department in Pinellas County. So they would have right to enter into a lease agreement. It's consistent with our land use. So the city doesn't have concerns because there's no specific deed restriction that we are aware of that would limit the use for what they're proposing.
Understood. Thank you.
anybody else?
I have a question. It's directly, mostly for the attorney. I'm assuming you're not the attorney. Yeah, well, what's going to stop other organizations from doing the same thing on the premises?
Are you asking me?
Yes.
I'm not sure. I can't answer that.
I
Okay.
can answer
Or
that.
maybe
The limitations are based on the lease agreement. In order for any organization to be party to any property within that park, they would actually have to get permission through some type of lease agreement from Pinellas County, which is exactly what the applicant has done. They've gone through the rather lengthy process, because we've been talking to them since the beginning of the summer on this, to actually get the legal right to utilize that property for what they're doing. So any other organization would have to go through the
Future
same any organization, even if they have a change in designation, they're going to have to update their lease agreement with the county. So no other organization is going to be able to utilize this property without previously getting the permission from Pinellas County to utilize that property, because they technically are the owners of the property. As far as the site plan is consistent, and the use, if it were to change here, would likely have to come back to the board, and then we would determine once again, is it consistent with the land use? Is it consistent with the land conservation zoning that you have out there that allows very limited uses? And then is it something into the best interest of the community? And again, this is a rehabilitation for marine life. There's not a lot of areas where you have direct access to the Gulf, where they can bring these animals in and they can keep them protected, but also provide them with an environment that's suitable for that type of thing. You know, this is not a downtown Clearwater use that we're going to put animals in a pool. And, you know, they're really looking at trying to maintain and improve the quality of life of these animals, and then relocate them back into nature. So being in that setting, it's a much better place for them than, say, downtown Clearwater, or downtown, where a lot of our aquariums are. It's really hard to do any type of rehabilitation in that facility. So it's not uncommon for aquariums to have this.
Right. No, I wasn't asking about the actual activity or what the folks are doing. I was more so trying to navigate towards what future applicants, or what may it end up as in the future. Will there be a limit put on
the door, and then
will there be a limit to this type of usage?
Well, I would say yes, but it would be we would have to, that would be in concert with Pinellas County, because again, we're not the owners of the property. It is within our jurisdiction, but we are not the owners of this particular property. So we are going to have limited say in what activities are allowed out there, with the exemption of they must be consistent with our land use. But again, it's a recreational park. There's a lot of uses that fit into active recreation.
The other thing I'd like to just tack on to that is that the site that this is proposed for is a site that was previously used for spoils for the park, so it was already sort of kept away from the general public anyway, and it's one of the few sites in the park that are that way, so it sort of lends itself to a use that's different from the remainder of the park where people usually occupy.
I have a question. If it's owned by Pinellas County, why are we even involved?
Because it's within our jurisdiction.
Okay. Interesting. All right. Thank you.
I do have one last question. As far as educational purposes, would that facility ever be used for any school children to actually?
It's not intended for that or designed for that. That's not any part of this phasing plan. You know, like the director already discussed, any additional use or change for the property would require coming back before you, I would assume. So.
Okay.
Thank you. At this point, we would like to invite anyone from the audience.
You want to invite the applicant?
Excuse me?
The applicant?
Oh, the applicant first. I'm sorry. Please, as you come up, state your name and address, please.
Hi, my name's Charlie Potter with Ayers Associates, and I'm the civil engineer working on the project. I just wanted to quickly first try to answer the question that came up about drainage, and then I'll let the owners come up here and speak.
Excuse me, could you give your address too, please?
Yeah, it's 5803 Benjamin Road, Tampa, Florida.
Thank you.
The questions that came up related to drainage, the big issue was normally in a site development, you're required to attenuate the post-development, the change between pre and post-development flows. However, on this site, because we drain directly into an infinite basin, because we're only 200 feet from St. Joseph Sound, the only requirement for storage that was required on the site is related to water quality. So we're holding the first half inch of storage on site, and we're not modeling for a 25-year, 24-hour pre versus post-storm. So hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, understood.
Yep.
And then in terms of the water that will be stored in the tanks for the mammals, how is that? I'm sure there's a flushing process in terms of like new water, old water. How does that work?
Yeah, so the tanks are, I'm going to let the applicant give you more specific details, but yes, the tanks are flushed about once a month, and I'll let him kind of explain further the exact details of the percentage of the tank that are being drained and exactly where the water's going.
All right.
Okay.
Good evening, folks. I'm Mike Hurst. I'm the Vice President of Zoological Care and Operations for Clearwater Marine Aquarium, so thank you for allowing us to be here tonight. Give you a quick little history of why are we here.
Please state your address, please.
Sure. 249 Windward Passage, Clearwater, Florida, 33767.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we used to do quarantine, so marine mammal quarantine on island estates. As our facility, of course, has gotten larger, we have grown, but there's also been a lot of other viruses and bacteria identified in the marine mammal community that are very contagious, if you want to call it that can impact our captive collection. So clearly we would not want to bring harm to those animals who are non-releasable, and so we have stopped quarantining marine mammals at the island or at Clearwater Marine Aquarium. We are under contract with National Marine Fisheries as well as Fish and Wildlife, and that contract for National Marine Fisheries is really, we're not meeting our upholding our permit right now. So we actually transport, you may or may not have heard as an example, probably 3-4 weeks ago, we had a mass stranding actually in Fred Howard Park. We actually transported 8 animals to SeaWorld. Unfortunately, none of them made it. That's one of the issues. Clearly, transporting an animal over the road is very stressful on that animal. And so we are trying to find someplace close and realistic. CMA, Clearwater Marine Aquarium, is also responsible for multiple counties north of here. So we actually are responsible all the way up to Levy County. So this location even was a little bit better because it was on the northern end of Pinellas County. We have been working with the county for almost probably a good year and a half, trying to define an area that would work. We originally were looking at the Sand Key Park, and I think somebody had asked, why this park? The Sand Key Park, actually, the way their code is written, their legalese is done, that we could not actually build a facility there. And so the only 2 county parks that were available to us was Fort DeSoto or Fred Howard. And of course, we chose Fred Howard being the northern end. As far as the animals, so these 2 pools, we will actually draw salt water in. So one of our permits that we're getting about 10 different permits from multiple government agencies. We are actually going to do a 6-inch directional bore underneath the mangroves. And if you look at an aerial, you'll see the old dredge holes out there where they dredged to build the causeway out there into the for the park. And so we're going to actually put a 6-inch line out there to one of those dredge holes. They're about 10 feet deep, and that's where we'll draw our salt water in. We're also getting a permit from DEP to actually discharge our water back out. So our water is just as clean, actually it's cleaner, going back out. And so, what as Charlie was saying, we typically, our permit is for like 10% of the water change per month. We are able to drain the pool in its entirety. So if we needed to drain it, let's say the animal expired, we want to go ahead and shut it down, we can drain it. And or if we need to get hands on that animal, we'll drain it about halfway to where it's 4 feet deep, and we can get in and work that animal and walk on, with them and keep them suspended. So that's what our permitting with DEP and SwiftMud, Army Corps of Engineers, Fish and Wildlife, you name it, we're talking to them all. So in our contract with the county, we're a 10-year contract, renewable for another 10. So the county's been really great to work with. I also heard the question, why are we even here? That was answered early on. The county originally said, no, you're going to permit through us. It's county property. Then the attorneys got together and we identified, nope, it is Tarpon Springs jurisdiction for building permits and so forth. So that's why we're here today.
Thank you. Any other board members with questions?
What species are we talking about?
We're basically talking any marine mammal for the most part. Of course, we're talking about our local animals. So, we may have a pilot whale. We'll do spinner dolphins, bottlenose dolphin. We're seeing a lot of offshore dolphins coming in here lately, and there's actually been a fair amount. It's kind of crazy how they've been coming up to Fred Howard Park, and we don't know why. We were joking the other day and said, well, they know we're coming here. They're getting ready.
I just have a quick question. Forgive me if it's better for staff, but I noticed, or you'd mentioned about the gopher tortoises. Is that relocation going to be handled by you guys and permitted through Florida Fish and Wildlife, or how does that work?
Correct.
exactly?
It's
Okay.
they get a permit and they will actually, as part of their development, have to relocate those animals.
Okay.
So what does relocation actually mean? Are they just moving them over a couple of feet, or are they moving them to New Jersey, or what's going on?
They'll be moved in the actual permit information that they're required to present is a pretty lengthy report on the quality of the animals and what habitat is around there. They'll find the most suitable habitat, most likely because this is a county park. It will remain in the park. There are off-site location options, but unless the animals pose some kind of other threat, more than likely they'll be relocated right into the park.
They get a new identity?
I don't know. Not sure. Maybe a different shell.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
At this time, will anyone else from the audience would like to speak on this matter?
I have one more thing.
Yes, sir.
Heather, I was late to look at the lease. Is there anything in the lease that gives mention to the city of Tarpon Springs being responsible for anything? I mean, the lease is with Pinellas County, obviously, but is the city of Tarpon Springs mentioned in this lease?
No, the only thing that we're actually mentioned in as the jurisdiction for building permits is our jurisdiction.
Thank you.
So at this time, does anyone else in the audience like to have any questions or like to speak? No. At this time, then, we'll close the public part of this conversation and go to the board member. Any comments from any board members? No? Okay. Then I'd like to hear a motion to approve the application number 17-66, site plan approval to construct a 55,216 square foot area, including 2 marine mammal rehabilitation pools, pool shade structures, and a mobile office laboratory, the Clearwater Marine Aquarium within Fred Howard Park.
So moved.
Who first? Who second?
Whichever way you want to go.
Okay.
First, second.
Terrapini's first?
Yes.
Okay. Ms. McCumber?
Yes.
Mr. Stavropoulos?
Yes.
Mr. Frayne?
Yes.
Mr. Terrapini?
Yes.
Mr. Seaman?
Yes.
Mr. Hasse?
Yes. Motion is passed. Application is passed. Thank you. Good luck. It's a nice thing you're doing. Thank you. Excuse me. Next on the list, number 5, application number 17-103 and 17-118. Excuse me. Conditional use and site plan approval for 564 units of mini warehouses in the Highway Business Zoning District located at 1,180 feet north of intersection of East Klosterman Road and US 19. Does the staff have any comments?
A couple.
Thank you.
This is a conditional use approval to allow construction for 87,677 square feet of mini warehouses in 2 buildings consisting of 564 units in the Highway Business District, and approval for the associated site plan. The owner is White Family Properties and the applicant is Neal Partners. Essentially, this property is located on a vacant but disturbed site. It was formerly, a portion of it was formerly a parking lot. It's a rather large site. It's about 7.45 acres. Of that site, approximately 2.1 acres concentrated along US 19 is actually going to be developed. Part of the reason why it's limited the development that can happen here is you have a large wetland on this property. As a matter of fact, the wetland goes all the way back to the adjacent residential. So as a result, that that part of the site is not conducive for development of any sort. As a result, the applicant is concentrating the development on the front portion of the property. Essentially, they're proposing 2 buildings. The first building, or the larger of the 2 buildings, will be a 3-story building with 550 units. And then behind that, there is a smaller single-story building in the rear, which has a total of 14 units. The applicant did receive a parking variance, which was granted in July of this year. And essentially, it was a reduction of 33% of the required parking for a total of 42 spaces, which are proposed, 2 of which are ADA compliant. There will be some tree removal, and the applicant is proposing to mitigate by replanting 35 trees and then paying into doing a fee in lieu into the tree bank for the remainder of the mitigation that's required. This application went before TRC for review and was deemed consistent with the site plan review criteria. And I'm going to go through the conditional use criteria. The application's also met this criteria as well. Proposed use is required to be reviewed in the Highway Business District because of the fact that it's in the Highway Business District. This particular use of mini warehouses requires that conditional use review. There is a similar uses are located to the north and south of the subject property. The west is residentially developed, east and west are residentially developed. However, with the 500 feet or so of wetland between this and the eastern developed residential, there's no real concern that it's going to have a negative impact or be inconsistent with the surrounding land uses because you have that rather large buffer of undisturbed area. A conditional use is consistent with the goals, objective, and policies of the city's comprehensive plan. Conditional use will not significantly impact the existing mix of uses there because you have commercial in the area and you actually have a storage facility directly south of this. So it is rather consistent since we already have an existing, I believe it's a public storage just south of them. The proposed use will not adversely impact the property values. The development it will not require extension of additional public services. There's actually a lift station already out there because this site was previously part of the larger site where the Mexican restaurant was kind of cut out of this. So there's already existing utilities to the site. They will be providing some additional easements and an agreement between the restaurant and this property owner for their water and wastewater use, essentially. Conditional use is basically the proposed use is consistent with the majority of the uses in the area as well as the planned uses in the area. The conditional use will provide efficiently ordered development and will put the site back into use, which is currently underutilized. I mean, this is not a parking area where the Mexican restaurant is using. It's really just a vacant, formerly developed parking area that no one is currently using. With that, it's consistent with all of the design criteria of the Land Development Code as well as the concurrency requirements. There was no need for additional traffic study because they do not degrade the level of traffic beyond what's currently available on that roadway. As a result, both TRC and the staff find that this application is consistent with the following conditions. I'll read the recommendation and conditions into the record. Application 1703 and 17118 and Resolution 2017-42 requesting a conditional use permit and a site plan approval to construct 87,677 square feet of mini warehouse and 2 buildings consisting of 564 units located on the west side of US 19, approximately 1,180 feet from the intersection of East Closterton Road and US 19 in the Highway Business Zoning District is approved with the following conditions. The developer is responsible for acquiring all jurisdictional permits and for meeting the minimum criteria of the Land Development Code. Construction plans shall be consistent with the site plan, and payment of all requisite fees attendant to the project shall be paid in accordance with the Land Development Code. A revised utility easement agreement with all necessary exhibits between the city and the owner must be provided for review and executed prior to the issuance of the building permit. A copy of an agreement for the private lift station must be provided for review and approval prior to the issuance of the building permit. Provide a written request to the Building Development Department to allow the finished floor elevation if below 18 inches of the highest elevation for the adjacent street. Provide a modified lift station detail on the site plan for a 350 AST BFE backflow preventer. Ensure all details on the site plan reference the city of Tarpon Springs. The applicant must provide shielded lighting and direct all lighting internal to the project. It should say project, not project away. The conditional use and site plan will expire within 1 year of approval if the building permit is not issued for the property. With that, I can answer any questions that you have.
So I take it that you are recommending approval
Yes.
as long as these conditions are met.
Yes.
Okay. Any questions?
Yep. Heather, why was the conditional use necessary?
The conditional use in the Highway Business District, many warehouses require that conditional use review. You can't just open a mini warehouse like you can with other things and just come through site plan approval. They have to prove that they are consistent with the neighborhood. In this case, I would make that argument. You already have one adjacent to it.
Right.
It is a consistent use.
What was some of the background for the discussion during the parking variance? What was the logic behind granting the variance?
Well, you're aware that your code is somewhat antiquated. As a result of being somewhat antiquated, you have a rather older parking requirement for many warehouses. It's 1 space per 10 units. That's a fairly good sized parking lot that you basically are providing for units that are going to be used intermittently. You're going to have intermittent traffic there. So the applicant provided us with some updated analysis of what they've used at their other facilities. As a result of your code, we're also limited in the type of variance and the size of a variance that we can actually give. And the limitation is no more than 33% of the reduction. So the applicant worked with us to not only reduce the number of units that they were proposing, but also to work within our confines of our code for providing the necessary parking. Ultimately, they were successful in getting that 33% reduction from the board, from the BOA anyway. And so they've provided those 42 spaces that they would need based on
So the
that
logic
requirement.
is it's intermittently. Not all 555 units.
Yeah,
not everybody's
the
showing up at
likelihood you're
once.
going to have that many people at the facility at one time, they're just not finding that. And because we have parking studies, just like we have traffic studies that kind of show that this industry is somewhat changed since your code has been written. It's one of those things that, yet again, we needed to kind of probably update and work with the industry again. They're bringing forward a more typical facility that you're seeing. You're not seeing these big, massive warehouses. You know, a lot of it's concentrated into one building now, or a few larger buildings. So it's a little bit different parking that than having people pull up to individual bays. I mean, you do have that on this site, but it's limited to 14 units. It's a very limited building in relation to the larger building where you might have a bigger truck pulling up to drop off, you know, moving materials or whatever.
And then as far as in order to get the variance, you have to prove a hardship, right?
That's
And it can't be
correct.
Monetary, correct?
That's correct.
So what's the hardship?
I honestly don't have the backup in front of us for the thing.
I find it sometimes hard to prove a hardship.
The hardship
without
here
it
is
being monetary. You
well,
know what I mean?
part of their hardship here is they got a big giant wetland on their property. They have a limited amount of space that they're actually going to be able to develop any type of use. Less than 3 acres is tough for most larger uses when you have to put a parking lot of 100 and some odd parking spaces in. So the justification for their parking lot is twofold. One, the antiquated codes that we have, and also that wetland area that you have restricting the uplands that you have to develop. So I mean
pretty good.
it's really a two-pronged thing. I mean, you have to look at the code because the code somewhat is the problem here.
It's just hard sometimes to prove a hardship and not
Sure.
say it's monetary, because in a lot of cases it is. It's like, how,
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
I mean, if
Sometimes
they
it's-
had the space, they would have put the parking spaces in. It would have been honestly
Right.
easier for them to
I get
develop it.
I get it. So I see that they're selecting artists for the public art. Is that not something, if you're going to do that, is that not something that you show in the site plan?
They do not have to show it at this portion of the site plan. They actually will basically tell us, and we will direct them as they move through this process to start working with the public art committee to determine their artist, what their artwork's going to look like, and all of that will have to be worked out prior to the building permit issuance. It's not so much this step as the next step.
Understood. Thank you.
Any other questions from the board?
I just want to make sure I'm looking at this right. So the existing entryway is going to remain the existing entrance. I know it's kind of like a driveway
Yeah,
to
it's
nowhere currently.
exactly right now.
Okay.
That's correct.
And the separation between the warehouse and the restaurant parking lot, is that, if I read that right, it was just going to be grass?
Yeah, there's no requirement because they're commercial to have any type of buffer
Okay.
or any of that type of thing. And again, actually, if you were going to require the buffer would be on the other use because their parking lot's actually abutting in this. This really isn't their parking lot. It's really the entranceway to their building. So it'd be their drive aisle and then some of their landscaping that they're proposing with the mitigation for the trees and that type of thing. So really, they're more consistent with what you have out there for the restaurant. But again, the restaurant's an older restaurant, was developed at a different time.
Yep. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Is there any wildlife in the area that's getting developed? Did you study that?
They have done a basic environmental analysis. Again, it didn't go beyond where their wetland buffer is. They have a 25-foot wetland buffer that's shown on the site plan. It wasn't required to go beyond that, mostly because we expect there to be wildlife there. But this site has been disturbed for such a long time that there's really nothing living there. Now, they may find expired gopher tortoise burrows or that type of thing, but again, with the proximity to the highway and the vibrations and from people driving up and down 19, the likelihood that you're going to have wildlife that's in that first acre and a half is unlikely. They're just not going to want to be there because it's not a place that anybody wants to be living.
So wasn't an endangered species analysis done or no?
Yes, they did. They did do one, and there was nothing significant found. Now, that doesn't mean these are animals; they move. Right. So,
But I mean, there was an updated one done. It's
they'll
not just-
have to update that as we go through the process if they encounter something on the property.
Any other questions from the board? At this time, we'd like to ask the applicant to come up if he has something to say. Please state your name and address, please.
My name is John Mueller. I'm with Landis Evans and Partners, address 18115 US 41 North, number 600, Lutz, Florida.
Thank you.
And I have nothing to add except to answer any questions you may have.
I have one. Are you using the existing parking lot that's already there? Is that for your parking?
No, that parking will be removed. We have to regrade the entire site.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions from the board? No? All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any comments from the audience, please? Anyone like to speak up in this behalf? No? All right. At this time, we'll close the public. I'm brain dead here. Portion. Thank you. And we'll open it up to comments within the board. Any comments from the board? No comments. Okay. At this time, I'd like to call a vote on the application number 17-103 and 17-118, conditional use and site plan approval for 564 units of mini warehouses in the highway business zoning district located at 1,180 feet north of intersection of East Klossman Road and US 19. Excuse me.
Move to approve 17-103 and 17-118 with the conditions stated by staff.
And I second.
Thank you.
Excuse me. Ms. McCumber,
Yes.
Mr. Strovopolis, Mr. Frayne,
Yes.
Mr. Terrapini,
Yes.
Mr. Seaman,
Yes.
Mr. Hasse.
Yes. Thank you. The application has been approved. Thank you. At this time, we'll move to number 6, staff comments.
First comment is thank you to our new alternate for coming and meeting everybody tonight. We appreciate you willingness to join our board. You do have another board member because Mr. Parker left. We're very disappointed to see Mr. Parker go, but he's got some obligations with work that just don't work with your meeting anymore. So Justin Vesey, who is not here tonight, was appointed to your board at the last board meeting. So welcome to our new members. We're glad to have you here.
Thank you.
Is Miss Protus still on the board?
No, Anita term limited out. It does happen.
Can she come back?
After a year. So yeah, any of your members who want to come back can come back after a year if they choose to.
Thank you.
Other than that, I want to wish everybody Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. We are going to have a meeting in January. But other than that,
Do we know when?
I think it's the 8th. Is it the 22nd or the 18th? 22nd? 1/22/18.
Thank you.
It's a little different than the thing because of Martin Luther King Day. Your meetings have gotten a little pushed up and down. So with that, that's all that I have.
Thank you. Well, I, for one, am glad that the parking lot's getting straightened out by the Mexican food restaurant. There was a big controversy there on, the 5th or the Mexican celebration day that they towed cars away because they were off the line of the Mexican restaurant, and the guy was all upset. There were tons of cars, including almost mine. But interesting to see that being developed. So, but anyway, thank you. This is the last one of 17. Hard to believe. Any more board comments? Well, then I motion that we adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? Aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Go home.
All right.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you.